So as this is a little bit different to my other videos, I do want to issue a trigger warning before, because we will probably discuss details of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, drug use. It's not the usual stuff that I discuss in my videos, but I feel like in order to discuss this documentary to the full, I will need to mention some of those things. So just warning you in advance regarding that. Please enjoy the video. Hello and welcome to FTTR. I am Hugh McQuaid, and today we are talking about Mr. McMahon, the Netflix docuseries that was released today, and I have finished all 6 episodes, and I do have some thoughts that I would like to put out there into the ether. This is my review of the documentary. We're going to go into all different aspects, how it was presented, my overall thoughts, the technical aspect of the documentary. We'll do a bit of a deep dive. Before I dive into that, please subscribe, please like this video, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll try and reply to every single one of them as we dive into the Mr. McMahon documentary. So this was announced a while ago that they would be doing a Netflix series based on the life and times of Vince McMahon. This was all before the accusations and the lawsuit from Janelle Grant was filed against Mr. McMahon. So while that is an aspect of the show, it's not fully dove into, and we'll get to that in a little moment. But I think I'm going to start this off by discussing my overall thoughts on the documentary. Did I enjoy it as much as you can enjoy a heavy documentary about a awful person for the same reasons that, you know, I believe was it the Night Stalker documentary? People loved that said that was a really good true crime documentary. As much as you can enjoy a true crime documentary, I enjoyed this. I don't think it was perfect by any means, but in terms of telling a story, telling a person's life story and detailing the troubling yet also the innovations that they did to the industry, I think it painted that picture very well. Like, it was very well told in that regard. How people come across in the documentary, that's something we need to discuss a little bit, because obviously if you are a wrestling fan, you've seen that Vince McMahon has tweeted about this documentary saying that he thinks it vilifies him, how he thinks it's taken out of context. Having watched the documentary in full, I disagree with that. I don't think this necessarily takes his clips out of context. I don't think it uses sound bites to that extent, and to that you have to look at documentary production as a whole, because you're getting 2 hours, well in this case 6 hours because it is a docuseries, you're getting 6 hours of what is like 30 plus years of content of this man's life. You know, there are going to be omissions, and they're going to focus on the stuff that the filmmakers want to focus on, and that is the point of a documentary. It gets across a filmmaker's point of view while also telling you some objective facts, and then when the documentary is finished, you as the audience make up your mind on what you have seen. That is how I view documentaries, and in this, I think it did help clarify how I feel about Vince McMahon, how I understand Vince McMahon the character, and how I understand Vince McMahon the person. To me, this is a business-obsessed narcissist who will do anything for the business. That is the main picture that it painted for me, and did awful things while doing that. Like, that is how I feel coming out of this documentary. That is my own personal interpretation, and I think if that's the way the filmmakers wanted me to feel, then they have achieved that. That is the point of the documentary, is to get across like their point of view. Now I think crafting that and crafting the way it is told, I think it's done really well. I think the talking head segments featuring the likes of The Rock and Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin, Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon himself, John Cena, there's so many names across there, and I think it comes across as like this is their genuine thoughts. This is their genuine thoughts, because all of this, the majority of this show was recorded pre-2022, I believe. Sort of 2021 was when it was all filmed, sort of before the initial Hush Money Wall Street Journal article came out. So you have people like Cena and The Rock, and they're very affectionate towards Vince McMahon. They use the words father figure, they portray it in that way. And I think it gets across numerous points of view in that. So I think my overall thoughts, to sort of wrap up this initial bit, I think it's a well put together documentary. I think it challenges you to make your own decisions regarding this. And overall, I would recommend checking it out, particularly if you are a professional wrestling fan, because there are some details that I'll go into in a little bit that I wasn't aware of, that I found out, and I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know about this, particularly the older stuff. So that is my broad thoughts on that. I'm going to dive a little bit into the technical aspect now and how I think the documentary was put together. Netflix has set a standard for true crime, for documentary series. I think they are the best in the game at doing that, and I don't think they disappoint here. It was, I believe, the creator or one of the creators of Tiger King who helped and sort of shepherded this entire docuseries, and I think that shows he really has a craft for not just framing documentaries, and the amount of footage that they have from WWE is pretty insane. They have a lot of like old footage that they use, and it really helps paint a picture of the times, whether it be the steroid trial or whether it be ruthless aggression or whether it be the later stuff with the lawsuit. It really helps you feel like you are in that time, and I really appreciated that. Particularly, one of the big things about this is how accessible is it to a new viewer. I think that helps. I think this is very accessible to a new viewer. If you are not a wrestling fan, I think you can easily follow this story and follow the insider terms like kayfabe, like heel, like face. It all works. It works as a coherent 6-part documentary. But that leads into a bit of an issue. And the bit of the issue is, I think it's too short. I think 6 episodes was not enough time to cover the amount of content that they wanted to cover for this documentary, because there is so much stuff. And you could do a 6-part series just on the Monday Night Wars. You could do a 6-part series just on ruthless aggression. But trying to condense that and wrap it all in feels like some aspects don't get enough time and enough development. Like, I feel like I wanted to know a bit more about that. The key one for me is the Monday Night Wars. So the Monday Night Wars is something that has been done to death. Like, WWE did their series, you've got books, you've got DVDs, you've got so much stuff about that one facet of history. And there's a lot of focus in this documentary on that section of the Monday Night Wars, particularly the sort of back and forth between WCW and WWE, Ted Turner and Vince McMahon. Like, that is a big focus, whereas I feel like some other bits are a bit undercooked and underdeveloped, like diving into some of the sort of true crime aspects, particularly the earlier stuff, the Rita Chatterton sort of, that gets a little bit brushed over. And the bit that I didn't feel got enough development was the Wendy Richter stuff. I think the Wendy Richter stuff I wasn't really aware of. That's not really something that I follow, which was the Wendy Richter screw job. And that is sort of brought up. You get a few talking heads with Wendy Richter, and then it's sort of immediately brushed past. Similar case with the Ring Boy scandal, which I had absolutely no idea about. That sort of took me off guard. I think it's in the 2nd episode where I was like, I had no idea about these accusations. I had no idea about these allegations. And this is some pretty disturbing stuff. Like, I feel like you should be paying more attention to that rather than focusing on this one period of history that we've seen a lot of. You don't need to go in depth about the Monday Night Wars and the back and forth between WCW and WWE, because even if you are a new viewer, I don't find that important to the Vince McMahon story necessarily. Yes, it gives that sort of ego boost, but that felt way too developed for what it was compared to some of the other aspects, in my opinion. So one of the things that I think will come out regarding this documentary are comparisons to Dark Side of the Ring. Dark Side of the Ring, for anyone who doesn't know, is a incredible documentary series that follows some really dark moments in pro wrestling. You have like a two episode premiere about Chris Benoit incident. You have Owen Hart, you have New Jack, you have so many different stories throughout Dark Side of the Ring, and it's a really incredible documentary series. You should check it out if you have not. And I feel like this takes elements from that. This feels like a mashup of the Monday Night Wars documentary from the WWE Network and Dark Side of the Ring, where you get a taste of both. It gives you just enough real world context to understand these things, and just enough sort of the salacious, scandalous stuff that I think a lot of people will be tuning into this documentary for. If you are tuning into this documentary for stuff about the Janelle Grant lawsuit or the hush money packs or anything that happened sort of post 2022, you don't get a lot of that. That is mainly sort of the last chunk, the last half of the last episode. But I think it's presented in a really good way, like a really, really good way. Vince declined to do any interviews after this stuff came out, and you only really get, following 2022, you get interviews with people from the New York Journal, New York Post, I think it is, New York Post, and like Dave Meltzer doing stuff in this time period when Vince forced his way back in. So you don't really get, for that final aspect, the WWE side, the Vince McMahon side of things. So that does feel like something that could be developed if another series happens going forward. But overall, I feel like, there were just some undercooked portions of this that I feel like could have used a bit more development, especially when you're watching it in one chunk. It goes very quickly through things, like very, very quickly, because there's so much stuff they want to cover, that you get some scandals and some really awful stuff relegated to the back half of the documentary, like the Ashley Mazzaro stuff, like some stuff with Trish Stratus. It feels quite relegated to the back, and then you have some other things that you're like, what was going on there, like the Stephanie McMahon impregnation storyline that is just sort of a throwaway line. So I feel like that doesn't match up. I feel like if it had been maybe 8 episodes, maybe 10 episodes, flesh out a bit of those and really give some more wider context and some more talking heads about those incidents, because they just feel like they didn't have time. They didn't have time to include all this stuff, so that we'll give a one reference line or we'll show a news clip saying that. I feel like there's so much more for these that could have been developed, in my opinion. So what do I think about the overall content of the documentary? I think it's really fascinating. It gives a really good look into some behind the scenes stuff, like the gorilla position, like the initial starting of WrestleMania. There's a lot of really cool elements to this and stuff, backstage stuff that we would like to see. In terms of people in this documentary, I would say there are very, very few people who come off well in this documentary. I'm going like Vince does not come off well, Bruce Pritchard does not come off well, Steve Austin does not come off well, Triple H doesn't come off well. There are so many people who, I don't know, I'm assuming they obviously all recorded this stuff, particularly surrounding the Chris Benoit incident, that is really problematic and really, like, I can't believe you just said that stuff, particularly from Stone Cold about CTE. That is a really damning thing to say, and I'd implore you to watch the documentary if you want to know what I'm talking about, because I can't remember the exact quote, but You can probably find it on social media because it'll be doing the rounds. Same with Vince McMahon saying something along the lines of Chris Benoit was nuts, rather than sort of focusing on concussions, saying that Mark Calloway wasn't concussed at WrestleMania 30. There's some really bad stuff in here that really, like, shook me, because I was like, how can people think this in 2022 when it was recorded? Like, how can you think he's not concussed? He's just disappointed. Like, it challenges you to sort of ask those questions and take into consideration, why would people think that? And I think that's usually the best kind of documentary, is the one that makes you think and makes you think, and it makes your jaw hit the floor. And I feel like with the Mr. McMahon documentary, I was doing both. I was thinking and my jaw was hitting the floor. So, well done. So I do want to talk about, like, the overall presentation of the current stuff that is going on, the Janelle Grant lawsuit and stuff like that. They don't pull punches when they talk about it. It's not in there for a long time, but they do not pull punches when they talk about it. They obliquely reference that the person in the lawsuit who Janelle Grant was being trafficked to was Brock Lesnar. They detail the exact nature of the complaints, the defecation, the deplorable sex acts and stuff like that was all in the lawsuit. And having that at the end is like, it's still just that entire last segment. That is what people will be talking about most, I think, coming out of this documentary, is that last half an hour. Because if the way it's presented, you look at that timeline of events, you're like, how did we let that happen? And then they show the footage of Vince coming out after the allegations, and fans are cheering for him. It is just awful. It's so awful. That last half, I'm like, this was 2022 to 2024. How did this chain of events happen? Like, how did we as a society allow this to happen? And I think that's the most challenging part. The ending is the most challenging part for me. There's a lot of stuff to dive into with this documentary. I think it's one that may find a life on Netflix. I think if it starts trending, people might check it out, and then maybe that will bring this discussion back to the public conscious, because I think it really should be. I think, like, some of the people who were involved in this documentary and some of the things that they said, I think really need to take a big old look in the mirror, particularly higher ups at WWE, and really sort of think about what has been said in this documentary, because it's not good. It's not good, and I think this might find a life sort of on Netflix. I think it might catch on. I think they're hoping it catches on in a sort of Tiger King way, where everyone's talking about it, but media is consumed so differently than when it was when Tiger King came out, that I feel like this could catch on, but I'm unsure. It's almost like the way Dave Meltzer describes it in the documentary. People view wrestling as a sort of, oh, it's just wrestling. Oh, it's just wrestling. And then in reality, that leads to some awful, horrific occurrences. And I hope this documentary sort of sheds light on that, which I think it does a good job of portraying. It portrays those events, like Owen Hart's death, like Chris Benoit. It portrays them as horrific tragedies that were sort of brushed past by mainstream media because it was to do with pro wrestling. And I think with WWE being as big as they are, with AEW doing stadium shows and stuff in the UK, I'm hoping that this grabs the public consciousness and people understand that pro wrestling is not something that we can allow this stuff to happen in, because it's abhorrent, it's horrible, and it's just disgusting at the end of the day. And that was my final thoughts. My final thoughts on the documentary were, I think I understand my perspective on Vince McMahon, and he's an awful person. What more can I say? That's my interpretation. That's how I have sort of consumed this piece of media, and that's what it was challenging us to do. So I think overall as a documentary, it's a solid 4 out of 5. I'd say it's a little bit of a slow burn, but if you do like your true crime stuff, your scandalous stuff, and you want to follow something that is a bit, off the beaten path and might not necessarily get picked up by the mainstream, I think you should check out this documentary, because I think it's an important documentary. Along with Dark Side of the Ring, I think this is a important documentary series, and I really hope that people check it out and let me know their thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for indulging me. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope it's been informative. Thank you all for your understanding. Be nice to each other and have a nice day.